Good morning, everybody. My name is CatherineWojnaroski. I'm the village administrator in Bradley, Illinois, which is a community in Kankakee County.
Down will get you through.
Very south from here. So who knows where that is?
Oh,
Okay, a couple of hands. And who here is in municipal government or economic development? Okay, great. And then I'm using this clicker, Michael?
you can just do down arrow.
Okay, down arrow. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some exciting expansions in our community, and then also a collaboration with GWDC. So did you want to go over the first few?
I
Or?
was just showing where you were in the world. So
Okay.
the purple down at the bottom of the SelectChicago map.
So what you see here is a couple of our recent marketing pieces. So before I kind of talk specifically about specific growth, this really helps us kind of get an indication of where Bradley is in conjunction to larger metros. So obviously you can see Chicago, you can see Champaign. In between those two, we're smack dab in the middle. So Route 50, our commercial corridor downtown, we talk about CSL Berry, which is a huge biofarm out of Australia, actually, and they're doing a major expansion, so $1 billion expansion. And although they're not directly in Bradley's community, they are on this major corridor, Route 50. So it's definitely, obviously, impactful to us. So today's goal and the conversation I want to take you through is, what are we doing to get ready for that? In addition, to kind of tie in the medical piece with today's theme, we have a steel manufacturer north, again in county, but they're doing, again, another, not as equally substantial, but an expansion nonetheless. So these are some marketing pieces that we put together to really help in two ways. One, get the external message out about this growth and put this southern community on Illinois' map to help us prepare. But then also, what I've found is that it's really important to instill our pride in ourselves and to really understand that not only because of these expansions, but even prior to, where are we? What are we doing? We've had these great companies, but were we really celebrating it? So kind of a cause and effect there. So the second piece, the piece to your right, is really talking about our community. You can see our corporate border. It's a very interesting community in the fact that we have 3 different zip codes. So it's been important for us to kind of play around with marketing in terms of identity. Who are we? Well, we're clearly the community that's been given a gift with these expansions, but really how are we going to grapple with all of that growth when we have 3 zip codes that have varying addresses that aren't necessarily Bradley? Okay, any questions on that? Yeah. So let's, I don't have the snappy kind of music to our video, but we did, actually through our police department, because we are a small municipality, we did a drone video of this commercial corridor. So we're starting at our northern point, heading south into our community. You can see developable area here. We'll get into the CSL footprint in a minute, but you can see a lot of this is, farmland needs, somewhat of a suburban landscape. And you can see these areas here which are TIF, the developed TIF. So it's been important for me coming to Bradley about 14 months. Are we marketing these? Are we ready to market these for what that expansion needs in terms of amenities? Oh, thanks. Usually I don't need a mic, but that's fine. So here you see some aspects of that commercial corridor, and this is just really north of CSL. Really important here is Bradley has 7, almost 8 hotels. Obviously, tourism, attraction, expansion, that's going to be important as I continue to talk about the exciting ramifications. So 57 kind of meets right here with CSL bearing. So all of this is existing space. You can tell here, I mean, we have shovels in ground. So a big portion of what I'm going to talk to you about is that we might actually be behind the gun a little bit in preparing for what they need us to be and to do. So this is other commercial space that's really surrounding the CSL campus. And Meyer had came in, which was a big positive for us. It's right across from that CSL campus, as I stated. And here again is CSL bearing. So the expansion is really going to be to the south, and they're going to call it the spine. So it's going to be 3 levels of various state-of-the-art biomanufacturing. And what they focus on is rare blood disease. Okay, so this is another commercial area that's just right south of their campus. So it looks beautiful. We were very surprised with this drone video of how beautiful our community was. So when you look at this corridor and it needs refreshment, when you look at it from this angle, you kind of take a step back and maybe instill that pride and look at it from a glass half full perspective. So I'm not sure if we really focus on the mall. Raise your hand if you have a mall in your community. Keep your hand up if your mall's thriving. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So this is now South Bradley, and we're getting into, as you can see on the horizon there with some of the high-rises, that's Kankakee. And Kankakee is really another big anchor. Frank Kroller is here. Frank, okay. So any questions later on about Kankakee and Bradley? Because these expansions are really going to forcibly put us into talking about regionalism. But that's the overview of the community. Let me see. Here we go. There we go. Okay, so CSL, I talked a little, oh, there we go. So CSL bearing clearly the most important player in the room, 1 billion, it's estimated about 1,500 people. We heard in the previous presentation about kind of the ancillary effects of what this type of expansion can cause in terms of jobs. So take that, couple it with Nucor steel. Again, if I go to this map here, our corporate limit, you have the larger red box to the north, which is Nucor, the southern, which is CSL, and then we'll talk about them all in a minute. But what's been very refreshing for me to not only kind of get to know this community, because Frank, plug your ears, wasn't really paying attention south of 80, and now I'm working south of 80. So it's just a dynamic community that I think is really a secret in the ED community or community development industry. So what are we doing? Are we prepared for this now? Kind of. Are we prepared for all the ancillary effects? Not necessarily. So bringing in GWDC to help us understand the magnitude of how that chain reaction, I think we're still kind of taking that in. Are we bringing all of the regional players together in that magnitude? Not quite yet. But again, with some key partnerships, I think that that's definitely going to take place. So again, this is, I wish I could take credit for it. I'll take credit for the partnership with GWDC, but this is the work of Shai and Karen and Michael, and it's really helping us understand the impact, clearly, but what's the magnitude of readiness that we need to be prepared for? And are we prepared? And are we truly collaborating on this regional level? Because Bradley, look, they're adjacent to our community on our corridor, but are we really ready to help them bring and attract that talent is really what it comes down to. Okay, so I think in the previous presentation, this is that study, and I really want to bring focus to that because it's been integral in us kind of learning and understanding and preparing. Okay, so the mall. Did you think you were going to talk about a defunct mall today? Probably not, but it's definitely important to the community in these expansions. So as you can see, the larger rectangle is Nucor, the southern rectangle is CSL,
And what's smack dab in the middle, that green area, positive color, green, right? Redevelopment can happen, is our mall. So as, who's familiar with Frankfurt? Really quaint community, been there, right? Everyone's smiling, it's beautiful, you walk down the street. So literally, CSL has said, well, I'll tell you exactly what you need to do. You need to be Frankfurt like yesterday. Okay? It's not us, but we'll try, right? We'll try. So, so one of the things when I came to Bradley about a year and a few months ago is that economic development was maybe looked at in a very different lens. So there wasn't a plan for them all, although it was there in some plans. Those plans were maybe a bit dusty. So the first thing a newcomer did is really started to bring the stakeholders and the fixture players in the community together and say, hey, let's start to talk about this. So from that, we had our various mayors and Economic Development Alliance go out and actually meet with the mall owners. And although they're not participating at a level that we'd probably say we'd like, they're very agreeable to looking at redevelopment possibilities. So right now, the village is contracted with GWDC to help us look at the mall. So this first bullet point obviously talks about that. One of the things that was, again, for a new administrator for Bradley, and I think for our community as a whole, because I felt really the excitement and anticipation, is that it kind of to look at this one important property, it really forced us to get the band together. So all of these stakeholders, we generated lists, we put them together, the who's who. So it was really great for me because obviously I didn't have that backpack or that Rolodex. So GWDC, part of their vision was to understand intimately without the complexities of a government presence to see what these stakeholders needed now in the current state, and then when you kind of tie in that expansion, right? So 50, I think 50, in all honesty, I'm kind of looking at it was way more than that. I mean, I kind of took advantage of you. So 50 is the number, but it was way more than that. So the reoccurring theme, again, tourist-related issues. So you think about expansions, and we talked about, having state-of-the-art amenities to attract top talent. Well, think about the whole chain of workforce from, maybe the hourly wage all the way to the executive. Do we have what each one of those different layers need? We don't, and we don't have enough of it. So these themes about tourist-related issues was really interesting. And then discussions about how these changes could drive economic development, and then obviously that chain reaction. So a convention center space, large enough to hold 500 seats. So Nucor Steel, CSL, where do they go? Obviously they're evolving, they're changing, they're growing. But the reality is that what we had, right, you talk about any good BR&E, what we had prior to the exposure of these expansions wasn't enough. So when I talk about being behind, we were definitely behind. And we were, in so many words, hemorrhaging probably to areas like Tinley Park, to Orland, maybe even to Champaign in some capacities. So that still is a big conversation that we're having directly in relation to the mall space. Maintenance-free professional housing. So again, prior to these expansions, housing, we had a gap there, and we definitely have a gap. So if we can attract the workforce and give them not only the amenities, but obviously the housing that goes along with it, we're going to have a real problem, and we're going to not really be able to enjoy this gift that we've been given. So business incubation and makerspace. So this is a conversation that GWDC really brought to the table. And I, at least in my personal opinion, I don't think that we were looking at these two expansions from that lens and kind of tying that in. So it's been very interesting for me to work with GWDC to see them bring academia to the expansions and kind of tie that together, much in the same way as you heard in the previous presentations today. So I think that's probably why we're here, right? That correlation. So stakeholder classification. So you could just see just a whole plethora of various stakeholders and what we found and who it was important to talk to. The best thing out of this is that everyone was hungry, excited, enthusiastic to talk. The safety came with through the consultant. It wasn't a politician. It wasn't a staffer. It was a really safe space. And these meetings were held at the mall, which was purposely done because, you know, as you walk through a defunct mall and you're excited to talk about the expansions, you gotta just, you know, address the 1,000-pound elephant in the room. So, so everyone came out, and they came out in drones, literally. So stakeholder requests. So this is just probably a little preliminary sample of some of the data that came out of those meetings. So think again, as I spoke before, about hospitality. So we're talking about huge biopharma expansion, but look at what the community needed prior and needs in correlation to that. So dining, housing, entertainment, makerspace, and then identity. We talked about the zip codes. What we didn't talk about, too, is how the other communities really feed into where Bradley is, right? So where do the Bears train? And that is in, it's actually like, we'll talk about that later. But how do we, when you look at Kankakee County and you think of Bradley, we're not Bradley University. So we definitely have some identity, some challenges there. So civic identity is going to really fold into all of those other areas, in my opinion. So amenities, amenities, amenities. Maintenance-free housing, fitness center. So I am from the south side of Chicago, but now that I'm south of 80, I get to wear the northern hat. I'm a northerner. But so many of the things that you could take the Wojnaroski family, it's missing. And I myself, it's kind of sad. I bring my own pocketbook outside of our community because there is a gap here. So we do have an existing moving theater that is attached to the mall. It's probably the bright spot in the mall, outside of the fact that the building itself could survive some sort of element of redevelopment or not. The convention banquet space, gathering space, paths, benches, again, Frankfurt, if you're familiar. I worked in Glencoe for a number of years, so it just has that beauty that makes you want to be there regardless of where you're visiting. Incubator space, retail space, stores. So it's just this combination of all these things and how they have to coexist to make this successful for the expansions. So analysis, wants and needs. So the current density, we're going to have some issues here. So when we talk about tourism, and I think we're still trying to, and I'm looking at my GWDC team here, we're still trying to kind of perfect this message in many ways. So when you think about these expansions and you think about all the next steps and what it can bring and what it will bring, right, especially if we get the workforce element, if we do it right, so keyword, we instill those amenities, this can be the beauty of how everything feeds into each other. So if we bring what the expansions need, in terms of that, we could be looking at the possibility of $100,000 room nights. And then that's just going to feed right back into this economic engine. Okay? So I'm going to be looking for all of you to critique me on that, because that's another version of how we're going to really talk about this. So again, tournaments, social events, family reunions, business, medical tourism, right? Kind of the sad side of it. But these are the things that from that expansion will help us to continue to kind of create a community that's Frankfurt-ish. So, and then the last bullet point obviously speaks for itself. So again, continuing this, you can look at a couple figures here, but the magnitude of, again, the possibility, and I say possibility and that has a little bit of a question mark, but really it's a period, right? There's shovels in the ground. CSL started. So are we a little bit behind the gun? The answer to that is yes. So what exactly are we doing to bring the amenities in? Well, we're partnering, we're flourishing. We are really far on the north side today, bringing some awareness to exciting opportunities happening way south. But I kind of question a little bit if our community or region as a whole is kind of grappling with it in this magnitude. So we're having a lot of discussions. You know, any municipality struggles. Heard that from some of the locals. So we have to really, in terms of my job, our finance director, Robert Romo's with us today, a lot of the glory work of kind of cleaning up the in-house is going to translate to how we do this. So what can Bradley specifically do, and specifically goes into financially, to make sure that we're cultivating the amenities to really launch this expansion and have this chain reaction. So 6 months, a year from now, I'm going to tell you exactly what we did, right? Success story. So you have to hold out. So it takes a community. We heard from the previous presentation about that really gorgeous fast track. So I wasn't going to ask a question, but we're going to partner later because we're behind and we need fast track. So what we're experiencing now is how all of these things collide, and are they colliding, and are they doing it in the magnitude that they need to, because we're not going to do it by ourselves. It has to be regionalism. What I'm finding is that regionalism is a beautiful word. It's especially a beautiful word when you put a hashtag in front of it. But what exactly does it mean when you say it that way? And what does it mean in terms of cultivating those amenities? So all of these 5 circles have to come together. And we're figuring it out. I think we're getting there. So with that, do you want to ask some questions?
Yeah, no, there are 3 solid questions for you, so open it up to questions.
You were on fire earlier.
Okay, you never touched on really your university there. How are you intertwining, or how are you partnering with your university and taking a spin off that in order to market in town as well?
Sure. So we talked about Olivet. Obviously, Olivet is integral, and then we also have KCC, okay, Kankakee Community College, and both of those are extremely important. They're extremely important in the network of really CSL, but Nucor. How are we doing it? For me, being what I would call a new administrator, I don't have the details of that. I know it's definitely an important element. It's been part of GWDC's work to really make them, I don't want to say one stakeholder's higher than the next, but obviously when you kind of bring in the theme of today and those two, they're top players. So let me bring that to the mall space. When we look at the possibilities of the mall space in regards to all of those amenities, well, how do we keep that cultivation of talent going? Okay, so is kind of my focus has been in-house, but also external. That's when we really had to leverage and link to gain help from me and my team to say, hey, these are conversations that from a capacity level we can have, but they're kind of stepping out of the box to do it for us. So we're getting data, preliminary data, that's saying, hey, we have a use here, we have a need. We're not necessarily thinking outside of this box. This would be great. We didn't realize that. We didn't think of that. So again, a little bit behind the gun, but to start those conceptual, creative conversations, they're happening. Now, are they happening in a way that we're kind of bringing that regional aspect in? Not just yet, but I anticipate that that's going to be a big portion of this year.
Yeah, and I can add a little bit more color since I was
Yes.
in all 50 of these stakeholder meetings. The great thing about the stakeholder meetings was getting these things. When we talked with KCC and Olivet University, they were talking about how do we retain this talent when they're done. Actually, half of the people we talked to that went to the university came back 6-7 years later. The person who's running the new park district or in Kankakee. All these people who are the person who's now running the medical center in town, all grew up in the area, all wanted to come back, and they were just gushing about the amenities that are needed to retain these students. They want that edgy urban lifestyles. Oh, that's going to be downtown Kankakee. They want that space that is really ready for maintenance-free housing, 18-hour city type of lifestyle, much more of a suburban context. That's what we're talking about at the mall. So by going through this with working with the Village of Bradley, we now have this real great insight of those things that the community partners or the community players want to do to actually invest in it. And, and I think the biggest thing is, as Bradley is putting together a plan, and I told Ken I was going to pick on him a little bit earlier, because Ken Green with Comcast, he's critical on what it takes to put in those fiber amenities for those next generation cities. The big thing is, until you're showing those 100,000 room nights and you're showing that density, they're not going to put that infrastructure in. There's no ROI yet. And so I think, Ken, you can basically say.
Excuse me. When I take a look at investment, and in any of the communities we're looking at, for us as a service provider, you have to see population density, not only of residents, but of businesses. I probably focus a little bit more of my attention towards the commercial aspect of investment, but if, like the mall, it was a really poor investment just because of the occupancy rate, and I didn't necessarily see that occupancy rate going up, changing the dynamics or the investment of the existing owner. They don't want to invest anymore. So if those kind of dynamics exist and they're expecting us to make an investment, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Because just like anybody, developer or any other investor, if they're going to put money on the table, they're expecting a return. No different from us. And we get pretty good predictability, but if you're not doing your due diligence, you'll end up with a bunch of stranded capital that you'll never get back.
Great. Thank you. And so I know I've been blabbering enough. More questions? Michael.
How are you handling cultural interface?
Oh, great.
Well, we're handling it in two ways. We're handling it with kid gloves, and then we're handling it like a bull in a china shop. Okay, so, and let me talk a little bit about that. So we're handling it with kid gloves because clearly we have a community that born and raised, a lot of that cultivation within, and they kind of remember this nostalgic aspect of it, right? So how do you maybe hang on to that a little bit, but also kind of break free from it? And then the bull in the china shop is we're getting a lot of talent in. So not to pat my own back, but I'll focus on our finance director, who's also a South Sider, but really a Northerner. Look, we can speak to it because we, in so many ways, I live there now, and I need some things that maybe not being homegrown, I'm not getting. So I can kind of speak from that voice of the current relocated talent, or most importantly, the future. So I think the challenge is going to be finding the happy medium between the two. And when you look at it culturally, I'm also going to go out there and say politically, it's right now, in my opinion, a very now lens that needs to change into a then lens in terms of, do we truly understand the identity of what this next generation needs and who are they? So what I like to do, because sometimes my voice isn't as selly as I like to think it is, I like to take field trips, and we definitely need to do partnering. So one of the interesting things that our team did is kind of peeked back in on CSL. So as they're in this hiring blitz, they're doing things that are foreign to this fixed population. They're doing collaborative space, but then you have a quiet room. And there's just a lot of questions, I don't want to say from the locals. So a lot of that is just hand-holding to say, let's understand who these people are. And they're not scary, and they're great. And here's how they're going to change.
So what I meant by culture was also, CSL Behring is not an American company. And it's an international company coming into the U.S. And they may have American employees, but still the culture is from, it's a foreign culture. And,
Yeah.
An example, we in Skokie, there was a German pharma company that came in, and the mayor actually went to Germany to understand them better, met with senior management, traveled to Germany to get the flavor of what the company's needs were, to be able to understand better, the dynamics and the cultural.
Sure, sure. So I'm going to call it a home office, but a main campus is in King of Prussia, right? So CSL outside of, obviously Australia is there, but they're very much an American company. So my take on it, it could be, this is my, 14, 15-month take on it is, they want to be us, and they want to be part of our culture. So I haven't necessarily felt any sort of cultural challenge. Now, in terms of their market and their industry and how, externally that feeds in, I mean, that's much more of a larger conversation. What I have seen, though, kind of being also a new resident to this community, is we do have diversity. But in terms of culture and kind of like creating that melting pot, are we celebrating it? Who are we, right? Are we ignoring the parts that we want to ignore? Or are we celebrating them? So I'm seeing change and difference in colors and all of those things. We're also seeing that in our housing. So when you look at kind of municipal management, which is my expertise, I like to look at that from the lens of, say, service work. So I think our police department is a great gauge on that as we're interacting with the community from both like the business needs of SAFE and then also the residents. So a continued conversation.
And because again, we were in all these meetings too with all the different folks, and we haven't turned over all our data back to Bradley. So these are some little glimpses, but about culture and about bringing in different pieces. We were talking about Thai restaurants. I don't think there is a Thai restaurant in town.
It's in Tinley Park, I'll tell you.
But with the culture and so we'll do Thai one day. So, but with that culture and those and people coming in, when they were talking about what those needs are, when the scientists are coming from Switzerland or Germany, and if they're going to be there for 3 months, they need this maintenance-free housing. They want to be able to bike. You have this great new bike program that's working. You want those corridors that we've talked about. So these things all go in. So as Mike was just talking about culture, it is starting to bend towards that talent of the then. And I think that's what this whole study that you've working with us to do is getting you to that space.
Well, it's just understanding it. I think that we don't know it yet. We don't know it, and look, CSL did their thing. They didn't ask for much. They're doing their thing, and that's great for obviously Illinois and clearly. But so we're tapping into that to kind of say, hey, you got to share with us a little bit. So we understand you want to be Frankfurt, but what we're not. So how can we help you with that? So we're getting to know them.
Any other questions? All right, great. We're going to take a 10-minute, 15-minute